Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the candlelit corridors of Tudor England, where the tapestries whisper secrets and the air smells faintly of beeswax sweat and something darker. Imagine narrow passageways in royal palaces where the flicker of torchlight dances on faces both powdered and pale, and every whispered word could mean seduction or a sentence of death. You're standing in a world where love is a dangerous transaction, intimacy is tightly policed, and pleasure itself can be a crime. You might think you'd handle it until you realize the rules are always shifting, and the punishment for crossing them can be as public as it is brutal. In other words, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where and when you're joining me from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere between the late 15th and early 17th centuries. You're in a land ruled by the Tudors, a dynasty glittering with pageantry and power, but riddled with superstition, religious paranoia, and an obsession with appearances. Here, sexuality is not just a private matter. It's a public performance, a tool of politics, and a weapon of control. Courtship dances are as calculated as military strategy. A misplaced glance across a banquet table can spark a scandal that ends in the tower. And the boundaries between seduction, coercion, and survival are as blurred as the candlelight. You've been brought here not as a noble born into velvet privilege, but as a quiet observer, a shadow who slips from the drafty kitchens to the echoing great halls. You watch as young women are trained not in the art of love, but in the performance of it. How to lower their eyes at the right moment. How to smile just enough to suggest interest, but never invitation. You notice the way a man's hand might linger on a wrist during a dance long enough to send a message, short enough to deny it, if accused. But beneath all the courtly manners lies a world of dangerous games. Rumors flow faster than wine, and each one can ruin or elevate a life. The king's favor is the most intoxicating prize and the most lethal. You've heard the stories, of course. How Anne Boleyn supposedly entranced Henry VIII with nothing more than her eyes and a calculated refusal. How Catherine Howard, barely more than a teenager, played a game of flirtation she couldn't win. The stakes are always higher for women, but no one is truly safe. Even a man can be accused of carnal misdeeds that, when politically useful, lead to a noose. You find yourself standing in a gallery during a masked ball. The air is thick with the scent of rosewater and roasting meat from the feast below. Laughter bubbles up from pockets of conversation, but it's edged with caution. Every couple on the dance floor seems to speak in a secret language, hands brushing eyes, darting fans snapping open and shut in coded rhythms. Somewhere behind a curtain, two figures disappear, risking everything for a few stolen minutes. If you think this is just a matter of prudish rules and moral hypocrisy, you'd be wrong. These practices are terrifying, not just because they restrict desire, but because they weaponize it. The Tudors know that controlling intimacy means controlling loyalty. A mistress can be used to extract secrets from a rival. A false accusation of adultery can remove an enemy without spilling a drop of blood on the battlefield. Even marriage is rarely about love. It's a contract binding families' fortunes and political alliances. And then there are the public punishments. You've heard the bell ring in the courtyard before a warning that someone is about to be paraded for moral crimes. The crowd gathers eager for spectacle. You push through them heart-pounding as a woman is brought forth, her head bowed under a linen hood. The herald's voice cuts through the winter air, listing her crimes: lewd behavior, unchaste conduct, betrayal of her wifely duty. Each word is like a lash. You watch as she is dragged to the pillory, her wrists locked in place, and the jeers of the crowd wash over her. Somewhere in that noise is fear, the fear of every onlooker that they could be next. It's not just the nobility who suffer under these codes. In the villages, local moral courts keep watch, ready to shame anyone suspected of fornication outside marriage. A night spent in the stocks, a fine too heavy to pay, a scarlet mark sewn into your clothes. These punishments linger long after the act itself. Gossip travels like wildfire, burning reputations to ash. Still, in the quiet corners, human nature resists. Lovers meet in shadowed alcoves, in the cover of church cloisters, in the rushes at the edge of the riverbank. They whisper in the old tongue, touch hands under the table, risk everything for the warmth of a stolen embrace. You can almost feel the thrum of tension in the air, a mix of longing and dread, where every heartbeat could be the sound of approaching footsteps. Tonight, you'll follow these stories deeper. You'll slip into the hidden rooms of palaces, through the back doors of taverns, into the bedchambers where power and passion collide. You'll see how Tudor England crafted its most terrifying sexual practices, not just through cruelty, but through a precise, unrelenting system of fear. And somewhere along the way, you'll realize the scariest part isn't the punishments themselves, but the way people learn to live under them, until they can't tell where obedience ends and desire begins. You follow the echo of boots along the stone corridor, the sound softened by rushes strewn on the floor. The torches hiss as you pass, their smoke curling toward the high beams. Somewhere ahead, music drifts from the great hall, lutes and voices weaving together in a song about courtly love. But you know better than to take the words at face value. In Tudor England, love is often a disguise, a polished mask worn to conceal strategy, ambition, or survival. You emerge into a chamber warmed by a fire big enough to roast an ox. The walls are hung with tapestries depicting hunts and mythic battles, but it's the people who draw your gaze. Courtiers gather in clusters, dressed in silks, brocades, and velvets so rich they shimmer in the firelight. Their laughter has an edge, the kind that comes from knowing each jest carries an unspoken test. Will it flatter, offend, or intrigue? Somewhere among them, the king moves like the sun in his own solar system, every eye drawn toward him, every orbit determined by his favor. It's here that the most dangerous seductions begin. Not in the bedchamber, but in the calculated brush of a hand as a goblet is passed, in the lingering look over a Gobon table where men gamble for more than money. A noblewoman leans toward a courtier, her words so soft, they're meant to be felt on his ear more than heard. But her eyes, those are for someone else entirely, a rival watching from across the room. This is the first rule you start to understand in Tudor England. Intimacy is often performed for a third person's benefit. You drift closer to the hearth, where two ladies in waiting murmur together. One speaks of a recent scandal, how a young maid of honor was found alone with a visiting ambassador. No one knows what passed between them, But that hardly matters. The rumor alone is enough to damage her, to make her a liability at court. If her family can't protect her with swift marriage to someone of influence, she may be sent away, her life reduced to a cautionary tale whispered to other young women. And yet for all this fear, you see defiance flicker in the edges of the court's behavior. There are games, elaborate, coded exchanges that allow people to flirt under the guise of wit. A well-placed verse slipped into a book, a ribbon accidentally left behind, a glance held half a beat too long during a formal bow. These are not the actions of people cowed into silence. They're acts of rebellion so small they seem harmless, but each carries risk. Then you remember the punishments, and the risk sharpens. The stories of men tortured into confessing affairs they never had, of women executed on trumped-up charges because their beauty threatened a queen's standing. The court is a stage where you must play your role perfectly because the audience, both the king's allies and enemies, is always watching. Later you find yourself in a gallery lined with tall windows, the night outside pressing dark and heavy against the glass. Here a group of musicians plays for a smaller crowd. A dance is forming slow, deliberate steps, partners exchanging places. The dance is a language you don't yet speak, but you can see how it communicates the way one man's hand rests a fraction too long on a woman's waist, how she steps away with a smile that could mean either invitation or warning. Every movement is charged, but nothing is explicit. It can't be. A shadow falls across you, and you turn to find a man in plain but well-tailored clothes. His eyes are sharp, measuring. You realize he's not here to dance or to drink, he's watching. Perhaps he's the Queen's man sent to report on who lingers too closely with whom. Perhaps he's the King's agent, gauging loyalty by the tilt of a head or the touch of a hand. In a place where a single indiscretion can lead to ruin, spies are as common as servants. And yet even in this suffocating atmosphere, people find ways to connect. You overhear a courtier reciting a sonnet, his voice low and steady, while a lady traces the embroidery on her sleeve to keep from meeting his gaze too openly. You see two men standing too close at the edge of the crowd, their words too quiet for you to catch. Relationships like theirs, if discovered, would not only end careers, but could bring the scaffold. Still, they risk it. What strikes you most is how ordinary these dangerous moments appear. Nothing in the scene would shock an outsider. But you've begun to understand that in Tudor England, terror doesn't come only from public executions or formal accusations. It comes from knowing that every casual gesture could be taken as evidence. Every conversation could be your undoing. And yet for some, that danger is part of the thrill. From the gallery you watch as the dance comes to an end. Partners bow and step away, some with relief, others with reluctance. The king rises from his seat, signaling the evening's shift. Servants move to clear the space, and you're caught in the tide of bodies moving toward the doors. But as you go, you notice a folded scrap of parchment left on a window ledge, the ink fresh enough to glisten. You're tempted to read it to glimpse the dangerous pulse running beneath this glittering surface. But you know here in this world, that kind of curiosity can cost you more than your life. You step back into the corridor, the music fading behind you, the air cooler and quieter. Somewhere ahead lies the next chamber, the next game, the next peril dressed as pleasure. And you're not done yet. The night in Tudor England is long, and the shadows are only getting deeper. You move with the current of bodies into a narrower passage where the stone seems to hold its breath. Here the court's noise thins to threads, footfalls, a suppressed laugh, the clink of a belt hook brushing the wall. A maid hurries by with a warming pan, its brass belly whispering over sheets in some chamber up ahead. You follow the heat like a moth to a candle, and the corridor opens into a suite lit by tallow candles that smolder like little suns, each one a watchful eye. The room smells of lavender wine and wool singed by the fire. At first glance, it's only a bedchamber dressed for sleep, but you've learned not to trust appearances. In Tudor England, a bed is never just a bed. It's a ledger, a courtroom, a throne, a battlefield, and tonight it's about to become a stage. A hush ripples across the antechamber. The bedding is beginning. Not the soft, private moment you might expect, not a closing of doors and a crackling hearth and two people choosing each other. No, the bedding is a ritual, a public guarantee that a union exists and can be proven later by children. You've heard of this ceremony performed for nobles, and sometimes for those who need the proof to stick. Witnesses crowd the doorway, ladies in waiting, a groom of the chambers, a priest murmuring a blessing, a pair of older women with hands like knots of oak root. They carry linen's ribbons and the kind of silence that is heavier than words. You are pressed close enough to feel the room's heartbeat, the cruel curiosity that always accompanies sanctioned intimacy. They bring the couple forward, both pink with wine and dread. The bride's hair is unbound, streaming over her shift like a banner. The groom tries to look triumphant, but his smile falters whenever an eye meets his. There are jokes, of course, loud ones meant to make the room laugh, and smaller ones tossed like pebbles to sting. A steward announces something coarse about virility, and a few men whoop as if victory can be conjured with noise. You know the script, the newlyweds are undressed down too. Linen the bed is blessed. The curtains are drawn, sometimes only halfway. Someone will later swear, hand on gospel, that everything appeared proper, even if no one truly saw. That's how the ritual works. It makes intimacy a rumor endorsed by authority. You feel the terror settle in your ribs as those older women tuck the sheets tight and smooth their fingers, precise as surgeons. They are not here as chaperones only. They are here as archivists of the body. If the bride bleeds, the sheet becomes a document, a proof of virginity that will be discussed by men who were never present. If she does not, there will be whispers, and those whispers will calcify into challenges, then charges, then consequences. You watch the bride fumble with her sleeve, ties, cheeks blazing. You want to look away to grant her the privacy you would beg for yourself. But in this world, privacy is a luxury that rank can buy only selectively. Public ceremony burrows into the most private places and plants a flag. You know what can follow if the sheet fails to testify. Annulments demanded by families hungry for better alliances. Physicians called to examine what no one should claim the right to examine. Judges and canon lawyers paging through defect lists as if a woman were a barrel of goods with a crack in the stave. You can almost hear the phrases, imperfect, impotent, frigid, barren, each word a sentence. And then there are remedies, some laughable, some cruel potions, to kindle desire charms, to open a reluctant body, pilgrimages to shrines where candles gutter over the petitions of those who could not make their bodies do what politics requires. Behind you, two men speak softly of a case from last winter, when a match contracted for land fell into dispute after the wedding night yielded no stain to show the world. The bride's women swore they had seen what they had not. The groom's kin swore the opposite. Money changed hands. A cousin remembered a rumor from years ago that now bloomed like mold, and in the middle of it stood two young people who had barely met before this night, forced to watch their bodies be turned into heralds, bearing messages they never wrote. You imagine how small you would feel under such scrutiny, a person shrunk to a symptom to data others interpret in courtly Latin. The priest withdraws with a blessing. The curtains billow, the witnesses disperse, and still you can't breathe. Because you know the bedding is only one doorway. If marriage is a hinge on which fortunes swing, then every misstep inside the bedchamber can be forged into a blade. A barren year and a woman's household grows colder. A second barren year and hands start counting her faults on their fingers. A third, and someone whispers of witchcraft. You catch a scrap of gossip floating near the hearth, a noble lady accused by her husband's mother of closing her womb with charms, as if a woman would choose to load the dice against herself. The mother-in-law collected a silk ribbon from under the lady's mattress and swore it had knots in it, 9 of them, the devil's arithmetic. The ribbon was ordinary, but the accusation had its own momentum. You step into the passage again and find the castle's pulse racing toward another chamber, this one not warm but cold with authority. Here sits the moral court or something like it, not the royal council, but a smaller tribunal that chews to pulp the small scandals of common folk attached to the court. A woman brought for light behavior, perhaps a kiss caught by the wrong eyes, perhaps a doorway meeting too late at night. Her husband stands stiff face locked, while a beadle reads out the charge as if it were a theft. The punishment will not be blood, but spectacle, public confession, a fine impossible to pay, a walk through the streets in a smock with a paper crown labeled with her sin. You think about the smock walking, how the body is made into a billboard, how shame is sown like seed expected to bloom into obedience. And then a second case more dangerous, a young man charged under new grim statutes that scrape desire down to categories and hang them on the gallows. You stare at the floor, at the damp in the stones that looks like bruises. The word for his crime is a cudgel one that laws sharpened recently cold phrases inked into statutes that turn private into treason against a cosmic order. You don't need to hear the details to know how quickly a whispered rumor becomes mortal. No one here wants to be seen listening with sympathy. Silence becomes a shield. You feel it lifting around the room like a wall. Back in the service corridor, you pass 2 midwives with baskets tucked in their arms. Their faces carry the kind of knowledge that men pretend doesn't exist until they need it. These women know how to soothe a laboring mother with warm wine and prayer, how to untangle a cord, how to lay out a tiny shroud without trembling. They also know the other knowledge, the shadowed one, how to catch the questions that men spit like nails when an heir doesn't come, how to coax truth from bodies terrified into holding it, how to sit between law and life and keep both from shredding the woman in their care. People call them witches when things go wrong, saints when things go right. The midwives keep walking. The palace yawns toward midnight. Laughter thins, then fattens again, as more wine arrives. The musicians' fingers ache, and yet the bow keeps sliding over strings. You find a narrow stair leading down to the yard where the cold bites with cleaner teeth. A cart rattles by laden with kindling for tomorrow's fires. Hampered by darkness, the yard nevertheless feels honest. Here the rules are simpler. Don't slip, don't freeze, don't get crushed under a wheel. You breathe, and in that breath you realize the peculiar terror of Tudor sexual customs is not only in the brutal punishments or the smirking ceremonies. It's in the way power turns your most private hopes, love, trust, children, a hand to hold into instruments, so that when you reach for someone in the dark, you can't be sure whether you've found shelter or a snare. You lean against a post and watch your own breath ghost out into the night. Somewhere above, a cheer thin and brittle suggests a sheet has spoken the language the room wanted to hear. The cheer will travel. It will become argument-closing proof for future quarrels, a talisman waved whenever someone needs to win. And if it had not come, a different story would be told, and that story would also harden into instrument. In this world, evidence is often a mood with paper pinned to it. A bell strikes. The hour changes. You climb back toward the heat, toward the spun gold rooms, where a word can save you or end you. The betting is over, but the watching has not stopped. It never stops here. You understand that now, with a clarity that makes your skin prickle. You square your shoulders, slip into the slow river of servants, courtiers, spies, lovers, and penitents, and let the palace carry you toward the next practice everyone swears is ordinary, natural, inevitable, until the moment it is turned against them. You climb the stairs toward the upper galleries, where the air is warmer but heavier, thick, with the mingled scents of spiced wine, damp wool, and the faintly metallic tang of candle smoke. Here the chambers belong to those whose names carry weight, lords, ladies, and the favored few who orbit closest to the throne. You step into a long corridor hung with portraits, whose eyes seem to follow you, each face frozen in its own quiet performance of virtue and wealth. But you know better. Behind many of these painted gazes lies a history of scandal, so carefully buried, it now serves as mortar for the very walls. Halfway down the hall, a door stands ajar. You hear voices low, quick, and threaded with urgency. Slipping closer, you catch sight of two men standing near a table strewn with parchment. One wears the deep green of a courtier in the Queen's service. The other's doublet is plain, but his posture marks him as someone used to giving orders. Between them on the table sits a small velvet purse, its drawstring loosened just enough to reveal gold. The conversation turns on a name, yours, no, someone else's. A woman's name spoken with the precision of a dagger point. The gold is not for services rendered in battle or trade. It is for silence, or perhaps more dangerously, for speech. They are buying a story, one that will ripple outward through the court like a drop of ink in water. It is about a liaison, whether real or invented, no longer matters. In Tudor England, once a story is loosed, it becomes its own truth, feeding on the fear and fascination of those who hear it. The purse is pushed across the table, and you know the bargain is sealed. Somewhere a life will tilt toward ruin before the week is out. You back away and slip into the next chamber, one lined with shelves of books and illuminated manuscripts. This is the library, a place where knowledge is locked, not just in bindings, but behind permission. Here, certain texts are deemed acceptable, others heretical, still others dangerous, for reasons that have nothing to do with theology. You run your fingers along the spines, and one volume catches your eye, its edges worn, its title obscured. Opening it, you find not sermons or psalms, but a guide to love and its so-called remedies. At first, it reads like a collection of harmless folk. Advice: the placement of flowers to attract affection, the use of certain stones to ward off jealousy. But then the tone darkens. Recipes appear for controlling desire, for dulling it, for redirecting it toward one person or away from another. You realize these aren't charms for sweethearts. They're tools for influence. A wife might slip a potion into her husband's cup to cool his interest in a mistress. A rival could send a scented gift laced with something to weaken resolve. It's not just superstition. In a world without forensic proof, the mere accusation of such meddling can be as destructive as the act itself. In the wrong hands, this book is a weapon. You slide it back into place before anyone can see you holding it. Through a side door, you enter a smaller salon where a group of women sit sewing by the fire. Their conversation weaves between gossip and instruction, and you quickly realize it's more lesson than idle chatter. One older lady is explaining to a girl, perhaps a niece, the art of managing attention at court. You must be seen, she says, but never too much. Let a man look at you, but not twice without permission. And if you grant the second look, be prepared to give nothing more. The chase is safer than the capture. The girl nods her needle, never pausing. It is a kind of survival school, one that teaches not how to avoid danger entirely, but how to make danger work for you until it doesn't. A knock interrupts them. A servant steps in, head bowed, to deliver a sealed note. The recipient tucks it quickly into her sleeve, but not before you glimpse the wax seal, the crest of a man known for his proximity to the king. The others pretend not to notice, and the talk turns to the weather. In this world, secrecy lives in plain sight. You wander back into the corridor, and the murmur of distant music draws you toward another gathering. This one is smaller, more private. A supper in a richly appointed chamber, where a handful of guests sit at a long table. The dishes are lavish roasted game birds, pears stewed in wine, honey cakes, dusted with cinnamon. But it is not the food that holds your attention. It is the way the host, a powerful nobleman, keeps steering the conversation toward marriage alliances, asking questions about family lines, dowries, and heirs, as if the answers were moves in a game of chess. Each jest about love is followed by a pause, a weighing of reactions, as though the true purpose of the evening is to test how much each guest might give or give up for the right connection. One young man, perhaps emboldened by drink, begins to tell a story about a lady's beauty. The host lets him speak, even encourages him, but you notice the host's wife watching with a faint, unreadable smile. When the tale ends, she lifts her goblet and says, "And yet beauty is never free. It always asks its price, though the coin is not always gold." The words land with the weight of both warning and promise. The young man laughs, but it's a touch too loud, as if he's not sure whether he's been flirted with or threatened. As the supper winds down, a servant clears the table and replaces the plates with a polished wooden board for a game. Not chess, but something older lines scratched into the surface pieces carved from bone and amber. The play is slow, deliberate, and it's clear that every move on the board mirrors something happening off it. A captured piece is followed by a remark about a broken betrothal. a blocked move by a suggestion that a certain nobleman's suit will be refused. Watching them, you understand that for the Tudors, games of love and games of strategy are never separate. When the guests rise to leave, you notice a small folded papers left behind on the table. You don't touch it, but you can read the single word written on the outside: tonight. No name, no explanation, just a summons or perhaps a trap. In Tudor England, it could be either or both at once. You step back into the corridor, the candles guttering in a sudden draft. Somewhere below, a door slams and you hear the quick, sharp echo of footsteps. Whether they belong to a lover, a messenger, or a pursuer, you can't yet tell. But you know they are heading toward a meeting where the boundaries between desire and danger will blur until they are indistinguishable. And you are going to follow. You follow the sound of footsteps down a narrower staircase, the kind built for servants, where the stone walls close in like the throat of a well. The air grows cooler with each step, tinged with damp earth and the faint sweetness of stored wine. At the bottom, a low archway opens into the undercroft, a half-lit warren of storerooms, wine cellars, and forgotten passages. Here the court's polished performances fade, replaced by whispers that carry farther than they should. You pause in the shadows as two figures appear at the far end of the corridor. A man and a woman, their movements sharp with urgency. They slip into a side room and close the door, not knowing you're near enough to hear the soft scrape of a bolt. You edge closer, pressing your ear to the wood. Their voices are low, but the words are charged snatches of confession, fragments of risk. He speaks of debts owed to a patron, whose favor is slipping. She warns that the Queen's eyes are everywhere, even here. The rustle of clothing suggests more than talk, yet every sound is threaded with the tension of knowing discovery would destroy them both. This isn't romance, it's survival wrapped in the language of affection. In Tudor England, a secret meeting can be both a lifeline and a death warrant. Perhaps she offers him information in exchange for protection. Perhaps he offers her influence to shield against scandal. The intimacy is real enough, but so is the calculation behind it. You know that if either is caught, the other will be forced to deny everything. In this world, betrayal is not always personal, it's just the final act of self-preservation. You retreat before the meeting ends, slipping down another passage that leads to the kitchens. The air here is warmer, thick with the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread. Servants move in a steady rhythm, carrying trenchers and flagons, their chatter a blend of gossip and complaint. It's here you overhear a story that makes your blood cool, a maid dismissed without notice after being accused of enticements toward a visiting noble. Whether she meant it or not was irrelevant. The accusation alone was enough to send her home in disgrace, her reference blackened. You realize that for those without titles, the rules are even sharper, the margin for error smaller than a breath. Beyond the kitchen, another staircase winds upward into the Queen's apartments. The air shifts again, lavender and beeswax, overlaying the scent of food. You step into a chamber where several ladies-in-waiting are gathered, embroidering by the light of tall candles. They speak in soft, measured tones, but the words are heavy with meaning. One recounts how a lady at court was recently commanded to dance with a man she despised, her refusal taken as an insult to the king himself. That single moment, they say, was enough to end her position. One of the women notices you lingering and beckons you closer. She tells you without lowering her voice that the queen has ways of protecting her own against the king's wandering eye, but they are dangerous. If the queen believes a woman in her service has caught his attention, she might quietly arrange a marriage or even send the woman away for her own safety. But if she acts too slowly, the woman can be drawn into the king's orbit, where attention quickly turns to ownership. And once you belong to him, escape is a narrow, treacherous thing. As you listen, you begin to see the larger pattern. These sexual practices aren't just about bedroom customs or scandalous liaisons. They are part of the machinery of power tools to bind allies, destroy rivals, and control loyalty. Every touch, every gift, every stolen hour is weighed and measured against the scales of politics. And the most terrifying part is how easily a person's body can be turned into currency without their consent. A bell tolls in the distance, calling the court to another gathering. You follow the sound into a great hall lined with long tables. The guests file in, the king taking his place at the head. Wine flows, laughter rises, but beneath it all runs the silent current of watching and being watched. Couples trade glances that last too long. Hands brush under the table. A joke about a wedding night draws knowing smirks. Every gesture here is a performance, a test, a signal to someone. Partway through the feast, a masked entertainer steps forward. A woman in a rich crimson gown, her face hidden behind painted silk. She dances slowly, weaving between the tables. Her movements deliberate each step and turn, revealing flashes of her wrists, her throat, the arch of her back. The room watches rapt. You realize the dance is more than entertainment. It's a reenactment of courtship desire, and the moment desire tips into possession. When the final note fades, the masks stay in place, not just hers, but everyone's. The king applauds, and in the momentary lull that follows, you feel a chill despite the heat of the hall. You understand now that the most dangerous things in Tudor England are often the most beautiful. The feast continues, but you are already thinking about the chambers above the corridors below, and all the places where the same games are still being played in quieter rooms. Somewhere even now, another door is closing against the world. Another bargain is being struck in whispers. Another thread is being tied into the web. And in Tudor England, every thread has its breaking point. The feast winds down, but the night is far from over. You slip out before the final toast, leaving behind the clatter of goblets and the hum of voices that will carry on until the candles gutter. The corridor beyond is quieter now, though not empty figures move like shadows, some in pairs, some alone, each with their own purpose. You've learned enough to know that this is the hour when the most dangerous business is done. You follow the faint sound of a door closing and find yourself in a narrow gallery lined with arched windows. Moonlight filters through, silvering the stone floor, and in the pale light, you see a man standing close to a woman, their heads bent together. His hand is on her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to hold her still. She's listening, but her body leans away from him just enough to signal reluctance. You hear him murmur something low and urgent, and she answers in a voice that's little more than a breath. Whatever passes between them ends with him letting go, stepping back, and vanishing into the shadows without a sound. She stays a moment longer, as if anchoring herself before moving on. It's a scene you've witnessed more than once tonight, moments where desire, duty, and danger braid so tightly together, it's impossible to tell them apart. In the Tudor court, consent is a fragile thing, easily bent under the weight of rank and favor. A command from the wrong person can masquerade as an invitation. A refusal can be read as treasonous pride. You can't shake the thought that in this world no isn't always a word the powerful care to hear. You turn a corner and find yourself in an antechamber outside the king's private rooms. A guard stands at the door, expression blank, but his presence is message enough. Entry here is invitation only, and those invited rarely come for politics alone. Behind that door, alliances are forged not just with ink and seals, but with silks and skin. And just as quickly as they're made, they can be broken sometimes, in ways that echo far beyond the bedchamber. A faint metallic clink draws your attention to a side table where a small coffer sits half open. Inside, nestled among folded cloths, are rings, lockets, and ribboned tokens, gifts perhaps, or spoils. Some may have been given freely, others might have been surrendered in moments of fear or desperation. In this court, a token can be more dangerous than a confession. It is proof of closeness, proof of preference, proof that can be twisted into a weapon. You close the lid gently, though you feel the weight of those objects, even after you've stepped away. Down another passage, you enter a chamber dimly lit by a single candle. Two women sit opposite each other at a small table, a deck of cards between them. The cards are painted with intricate images, figures, beasts, and symbols whose meanings seem to shift with each turn. They speak in low tones, as if the cards themselves might carry their words to unwanted ears. You realize they are not playing a game, but divining, seeking answers about the future. One asks whether a man she fears will pursue her again. The other turns a card, studies it, and says only, "Be careful whom you trust after midnight." It's more than superstition. It's strategy disguised as prophecy, advice wrapped in something that cannot be challenged by law. The candle gutters, and you leave them to their quiet warnings. Through another archway, you find a tapestry hanging slightly askew. Behind it is a narrow spiral stair worn smooth by feet that avoided the main halls. You take it the air cooling as you descend. At the bottom, you emerge into a passage that smells of damp stone and old wine. Here in the half-dark, two men stand speaking in hurried whispers. You catch a single phrase, "the Queen's chamber," and the rest is swallowed by the walls. They notice you too late, their conversation snapping shut like a trap. One steps forward, blocking the way until the other nods and lets you pass. The exchange leaves you with a knot in your gut. In this place, even the smallest overheard fragment can drag you into someone else's peril. Further along the passage opens into a low-ceilinged room filled with barrels. A single lantern hangs from a hook, casting long shadows across the floor. At the far end, a man sits with his back against the wall, head tipped to one side in uneasy sleep, or perhaps drunkenness. Beside him lies a jug, and across his lap, a folded piece of parchment. You know better than to touch it, but the seal broken now bears the crest of a family with enough influence to start or end wars. Whatever that letter contains, it was never meant to be abandoned here. You leave it where it lies because in Tudor England, possession of such a thing is enough to mark you for questioning. And questions here are rarely asked without an audience and a rope nearby. You return to the main corridors, the familiar hum of voices growing louder as you approach another gathering. This time the room is smaller, the light warmer, the wine flowing freely. The guests are fewer but closer, the talk looser. Here the boundaries are softer, the laughter louder, and the glances bolder. But you know the danger hasn't lessened, it's only been wrapped in velvet. The wrong word spoken here can still travel like fire through dry reeds, consuming everything in its path. And in this room, as in every other tonight, you feel it, that unshakable sense that desire is never truly free here. It is watched, shaped, and traded until it no longer belongs to the people who feel it. You've seen it in the gallery, in the cellars, in the Queen's apartments. You'll see it again before the night ends. In Tudor England, passion is always political, and politics is always personal. You linger just long enough for the laughter in the smaller room to fade into a low murmur, then slip out into the corridor again. The hour is late enough that the palace's great spaces feel half asleep, yet you can sense that somewhere behind these closed doors, the real night's work is still underway. The corridors seem to stretch endlessly, every torch throwing shifting shadows that could hide either a confidant or an enemy. Your steps draw you toward the chapel. Its heavy wooden doors stand open, the flicker of candlelight spilling into the hall. Inside, the air is cooler, almost still, and the scent of wax and incense clings to the stone like a memory. This is the one place where, in theory, eyes should be lowered and thoughts turned heavenward. But even here you see two figures standing just inside the transept, speaking in whispers. Their voices are low, but the tilt of their bodies toward each other tells you the conversation isn't about scripture. The man leans in his hand, brushing the woman's sleeve as if to anchor her. She keeps her gaze fixed on the altar, but the faintest smile curls her lips. It strikes you how this space meant for confession prayer and penance has become a cover for a different kind of secrecy. The chapel is one of the few places where a meeting can go unnoticed, where eyes are supposed to be closed and heads bowed. Here a shared glance during a hymn can carry the weight of a promise, and the brief press of a hand during the sign of peace can speak louder than a whispered vow in any bedchamber. You step quietly around the edge of the pews, moving closer to the altar. A priest kneels there, his back to you, muttering prayers under his breath. Whether he's aware of the conversation behind him or has simply chosen not to notice, you can't tell. In Tudor England, willful blindness can be as much an act of survival as silence. From the chapel, a side door leads you into the cloister, a covered walk around a small garden where moonlight filters in through the arches. Here the air is damp, the stone cold under your fingers. You hear footsteps ahead, quick and light, and follow them to a corner where two young women stand close, their heads bowed together. One holds a small object wrapped in cloth, pressing it into the other's hands. A token, perhaps a ribbon, a locket, a piece of jewelry that carries meaning only for them. They part abruptly at the sound of voices disappearing in opposite directions without looking back. You know such exchanges can be dangerous. If that token is found, it could be twisted into proof of an illicit liaison or worse, evidence of a promise to someone deemed politically inconvenient. Here, affection itself can be used as leverage, and the smallest gesture can become the sharpest blade. The cloister leads you to a side gate where a guard leans against the wall, half asleep. Beyond the gate lies the outer court, a darker, quieter world. You step outside, your breath clouding in the cool air. Somewhere in the shadows, you hear muffled voices, deeper, rougher than those inside the palace. You edge closer and find a small knot of men speaking with a servant who glances over his shoulder as he talks. You catch a few words enough to know they're discussing a nobleman's visits to a certain chamber. Whether they're trading gossip for coin or simply enjoying the danger of speaking it aloud, you can't be sure. But the way their eyes dart toward the palace tells you they know the risk. You leave them behind and circle back inside through a side entrance. The warmth hits you first, followed by the sound of music from somewhere above. You climb a narrow staircase and find yourself in a long gallery lit by wall sconces. At one end, a small group has gathered around a lute player, the music gentle and winding. Two dancers move slowly in time, their steps deliberate, almost ritualistic. The woman's gown swirls as she turns the man's hand hovering just above her waist, without ever touching. It's a dance of restraint, of suggestion, of every movement speaking a language that only those trained in its grammar can understand. You notice others watching from the edges, not just for enjoyment, but for signs. A missed step could be read as a slight. A glance held too long could be evidence of attraction or alliance. In a court like this, dance is never just art. It's another arena where reputations are made and unmade. As the music fades, the watchers drift away, but the two dancers linger. You turn to leave, thinking the night's tension might be easing, but a voice stops you. Low, smooth, and dangerous, it comes from a man leaning in the doorway, eyes fixed on you as though measuring your worth. "Careful where you wander," he says, not unkindly, but with a weight that makes it clear it's not advice. It's a warning. You nod, stepping past him into the corridor beyond, but his words settle into your bones. Because you understand, in Tudor England, you don't just choose where you walk. Every path is chosen for you or against you, and you often won't know which until it's far too late to turn back. The warning still clings to you as you move deeper into the palace, each footstep echoing more sharply in the now thinned corridors. The hour is slipping toward the kind of night where the torches burn low, the guards trade soft jokes to stay awake, and the palace seems to hold its breath. Yet you know this is when the most perilous encounters often occur, when shadows lengthen and the rules loosen, just enough for someone to test their luck. A faint glimmer of light spills from an open doorway ahead. You pause at the threshold and glance in. The chamber is modest compared to the great halls, yet still rich, dark paneling. A carved bed pushed against the far wall, a fire snapping in the hearth. Two women sit close together on a bench, their knees touching. One speaks in an urgent whisper, her hand gripping the other's. You catch fragments, something about the king's eye, lingering too long, a warning from a friend, the need to be elsewhere before morning. The second woman looks stricken, then nods. You watch her slip off a jeweled brooch and press it into her companion's hand, a gesture both of trust and of payment. You leave before they notice you, but the image sticks in Tudor England. Protection is rarely free even between friends. The corridor bends into a quieter wing where the walls are hung with heavy drapes to ward off the draft. Behind one curtain, you hear movement, fabric brushing stone, a muffled gasp. You push the fabric aside just far enough to glimpse a man and woman standing in the narrow recess, locked in an embrace that's as much desperation as desire. His fingers knot in her gown. Hers cling to his collar as if holding him there could change something about the world beyond this alcove. They break apart at the sound of footsteps in the distance, faces turning toward opposite ends of the hall. In a heartbeat, the moment is erased, as if it never happened. You keep walking, turning into a stairwell that spirals upward toward the attics. Up here, the air is colder, thinner. The narrow passage opens into a small garret room with a low-beamed ceiling. A single candle burns on a table cluttered with papers, ink pots, and quills. The man sitting there startles when he sees you, his hand sweeping protectively over the parchment. You catch a glimpse of what he's writing, names, dates, and notes in a hand too careful to be casual. A record, perhaps, of meetings, gifts, or transgressions. This is a ledger of secrets, and in this court such a document is worth more than gold or blood. You meet his eyes for just a second before backing away, knowing better than to ask who he is or why he's here. Descending again, you find yourself drawn by a low hum of voices to a chamber near the Queen's apartments. Inside, the Queen's ladies are gathered around a table set with wine and fruit. Their talk is sharp-edged, laced with laughter that doesn't always reach their eyes. They trade stories, some playful, others barbed, about which courtier's glance lingers longest, who sends the boldest gifts, who dares to flirt across dangerous lines. Beneath the mirth is a constant calculation to be noticed, is to court both fortune and ruin. One lady tells of a cousin sent home in disgrace for being caught in compromising conversation with a man already betrothed to someone the king favored. The lesson is clear, though, no one says it aloud. Here attraction is never private, and its price can be more than anyone expects to pay. From there, you step into a long gallery where portraits hang shoulder to shoulder, each face a study in composed dignity. Yet you know many of these people were caught in the same web you've been tracing all night. Marriages arranged as treaties, flirtations used as bait, accusations as weapons. In their painted eyes, you see ambition, fear, and the sharp awareness that survival here means knowing when to yield and when to fight. At the end of the gallery, a door opens to the outer wall walk. The night air is a shock, crisp and smelling faintly of the Thames. Below the city lies in a patchwork of shadow and lamplight. You lean against the parapet, and for a moment, it's almost quiet until you hear a voice behind you. A man steps out from the doorway, his cloak drawn close, his expression unreadable. He stands beside you, close enough that his shoulder nearly touches yours, and says, "You've seen more tonight than some see in a lifetime. Be careful who knows it." His tone isn't threatening exactly, but it isn't gentle either. He turns and walks back into the palace without looking back, leaving you alone with the river's slow, black current below. You know he's right. Every chamber, every corridor you've walked tonight has been thick with secrets, some whispered, some displayed like jewels. And the more you see, the more you understand. In Tudor England, the line between safety and scandal is so thin it could be cut with a glance. You turn back toward the door, ready to step inside again, but the moment before you do, you look once more at the dark water. It flows steadily away from the palace, carrying the city's noise into the night. For just a heartbeat, you imagine what it would mean to walk away entirely, to let the current take you far from these walls where desire and danger are bound so tightly together. But the thought drifts away like the tide. You're still here, and the night is not yet done with you. You step back inside, closing the heavy door against the cool night air. The stone corridor feels warmer now, the light from the sconces pooling in quiet gold on the floor. The palace has shifted into a slower rhythm. Fewer people moving, voices, lower footsteps, softer. But you know that doesn't mean the intrigues have stopped. If anything, this is the hour when certain doors open for only the right knock, when conversations happen in rooms too small for more than 2 or 3. You follow the faint scent of rosewater and musk down a side passage, finding a door just barely ajar. Through the narrow gap, you see the edge of a bed draped in dark velvet, and beside it 2 figures seated close together. One is speaking softly, the other listening with head bowed, hands folded in their lap. It might be a confession, or it might be a negotiation. You can't hear every word, but the tone is unmistakable, a mix of tenderness and calculation, the sort of exchange where comfort is given in exchange for something that will be called upon later. In Tudor England, affection often comes with an invisible price tag. You leave them to their murmured bargain, and move on only to be stopped by the creak of another door opening just ahead. This one reveals a brightly lit chamber, the glow from the hearth dancing over silver dishes and goblets half filled with wine. 3 men sit around the table, their cloaks thrown over nearby chairs, their voices low but sharp. They are speaking of a woman, her name, her supposed behavior, her place in the Queen's household. One leans forward and says, "It's not the act that matters, it's the appearance." The others nod. They aren't interested in whether she's guilty of anything. They're deciding how her story will be told. You watch as they script the ruin of a reputation, the way others might draft a legal decree. Further along, you find yourself at the edge of the great hall again, though now it's nearly empty. A handful of servants clear the remains of the feast, while a few guests linger by the fire, speaking in voices made thick by wine. One of them, a man with a flushed face and a loosened doublet, tells an elaborate laughing story about a wedding night in the North Country. His companions laugh along, but you see the way their eyes dart to each other, gauging whether the story has some hidden target here in the room. In this court, humor is often just gossip in disguise. A servant passes close to you, carrying a small tray with a folded parchment on it. The seal is unbroken, the wax stamped with the crest of a powerful family. The servant moves quickly, head down, as if hoping to deliver the message without attracting notice. You follow at a distance, watching as he slips through a sod door into a smaller, richly furnished chamber. Inside, a woman sits by the fire, her face unreadable, as she takes the letter, breaks the seal, and reads. Whatever she sees makes her lips press into a thin line. She folds the parchment, tucks it into her sleeve, and rises without a word, leaving the room by another door. The servant lingers just long enough to pour himself a quick swallow of wine from the sideboard before slipping away. You're left alone with the crackle of the fire, wondering what words could tighten a face like that in just a few lines. You know that letters here are dangerous, more dangerous than spoken rumors, because they can be kept copied and produced as proof long after the moment has passed. Back in the corridor, you nearly collide with 2 figures moving in opposite directions. They stop short, eyes locking for a moment, before both step aside, their faces betraying nothing. Yet the silence between them is thick with unspoken history. You don't need to know the details to feel the weight of it, an old liaison perhaps now cooled into something brittle, or an unfinished bargain neither has forgotten. In this place, past intimacies are never truly past. You take the long route back toward the Queen's wing, passing under high windows that let in narrow ribbons of moonlight. The hush here is different, less the quiet of rest, more the stillness of watchfulness. A door stands open just enough for you to glimpse a young maid inside arranging a lady's bedclothes. She smooths the sheets with deliberate care, then slips a small sprig of something green beneath the pillow. You recognize it from the herb garden's rue, a plant long whispered about for its supposed power to influence fertility. Whether it's placed there in hope or in warning, you can't say. Either way, it's a reminder that in Tudor England, even plants can carry political weight when the stakes involve heirs. As you pass the last bend toward the Queen's apartments, you catch sight of a figure leaning against the wall, a man you've seen before tonight, though you can't place exactly where. He watches you approach with that same assessing gaze others have worn, as if weighing whether you're a piece to be played in some larger game. "Best to keep your eyes open," he says quietly, as you pass, and your hands empty. The meaning is clear in a world where secrets are traded like coin. It's safer not to be caught holding anything at all. You move on without answering, but the words stay with you, twining into your thoughts like smoke. Eyes open, hands empty. In Tudor England, that might be the only way to see the dangers coming and still have a chance to slip past them. You step into the Queen's wing, where the air feels softer, perfumed faintly with lavender, and warmed by thick carpets underfoot. The corridors here are lit by steadier candlelight, the shadows gentler, yet you know better than to mistake this for safety. The Queen's apartments may be guarded from intrusion, but they are not free from the games of power. And in Tudor England, those games rarely stop at the bedchamber door. From an antechamber ahead, you hear the low hum of women's voices. Stepping closer, you see a circle of the Queen's ladies gathered around a table, their embroidery frames set aside in favor of wine cups. Their postures are relaxed, but their eyes are sharp, catching, and holding each flicker of expression in the room. One woman leans in to recount the day's latest whisper, that a certain courtier has been seen too often near the king's chambers after sunset. Another counters with her own story, a rumor that the Queen herself has sent subtle warnings to the woman in question, though whether out of jealousy or protection is anyone's guess. The conversation is careful, each telling, hedged with "I heard," and they say, but the undercurrent is unmistakable. In these rooms, alliances are woven, not just with loyalty, but with information. One of the younger ladies, perhaps emboldened by wine, asks what would happen if a woman in the Queen's service openly refused the king's attention. The older ones glance at each other before answering. Refusal is rarely heard, as refusal, one says softly. It's taken as a challenge or worse, as defiance. Another adds, and defiance here is treason dressed in silk. The younger woman falls silent, her gaze dropping to her hands. The lesson hangs in the air like the scent of the wine. You slip out before they notice you moving deeper into the Queen's private corridor. Here the walls are hung with rich tapestries depicting scenes from legend knights, kneeling before ladies maidens rescued from towers. But in the flicker of torchlight, the woven smiles seem fixed and brittle, as though they too know the cost of such stories. A door on your left is ajar, and you peer inside. The room is small, lit only by the glow of a single oil lamp. A woman sits at a desk, writing quickly, her quill scratching against the parchment. You notice the deliberate way she folds and seals each sheet, the careful impression of wax, the swift hiding of each letter in a coffer. These are not love notes. The careful anonymity of the seals suggests something more dangerous, reports perhaps, or instructions to someone far from court. She glances toward the door, and you step back before she can see you. Farther on, you come to a chamber where a fire burns low, casting a warm halo over two figures seated near the hearth. One is a man of middle years in a fine cloak, the other a young woman you've glimpsed before among the Queen's attendants. They speak in tones too low to catch, but the man's hand rests on the arm of her chair, his thumb moving in a slow, deliberate circle. She does not pull away, but her gaze remains fixed on the fire. Whatever passes between them is not simple. It carries the weight of expectation, the kind that can neither be accepted nor refused without consequence. The man rises and leaves by a side door, and the woman stays where she is, shoulders sagging. You slip away quietly, leaving her to whatever thoughts come in the wake of such an encounter. Through another door, you enter a gallery overlooking the inner court. Below in the moonlight, two figures pace side by side, speaking quickly. You catch only fragments: marriage contract, inheritance, her reputation. The conversation turns sharper, the gestures more emphatic, and you realize this is not negotiation, but threat. When they part, one heads toward the stables, the other toward the chapel, each moving with the quick precision of someone who knows exactly what must be done next. Back inside, you find yourself in a narrow passage that leads to the Queen's withdrawing room. The door is closed, but from within comes the soft sound of a harp. You listen a moment, the notes slow and deliberate, and then another sound threads through them, a voice low and even. It is the Queen herself speaking to someone in a tone that is almost tender. You cannot make out the words, but the rhythm is soothing, almost like the lulling of a child. And yet you know this is no nursery here. Comfort can be as calculated as any command. You leave the Queen's wing and step back into the main palace corridor. The sounds of the court have thinned almost to nothing, now replaced by the occasional creak of beams, the distant bark of a watchman's dog, the whisper of your own footsteps. The air is cooler, the shadows deeper. Somewhere ahead lies another door, another whisper, another transaction dressed as intimacy. You keep walking, because the night isn't over, and neither is the web you've been tracing through these halls. The corridor beyond the Queen's wing narrows and twists, leading you toward the less ceremonial parts of the palace. Here the floors are plainer, the ceilings lower, the candlelight thinner, and yet the air hums with a different kind of electricity. You've learned that it is in these tucked-away spaces, half-kitchens, small studies, private antechambers, that the most dangerous kinds of intimacy take root, hidden from the eyes of the court, but never beyond the reach of its ears. You hear a door close softly ahead. Following the sound, you find yourself in a narrow service hall. A sliver of lamplight spills from beneath one door, and the faint murmur of voices drifts through. You pause close enough to distinguish two tones, a man's low and controlled, and a woman's quicker, more urgent. She says something about a promise about not being left exposed if things go wrong. His reply is too soft to catch, but the silence that follows feels heavy like a held breath. Then the faint scrape of a chair, the rustle of skirts, and the sound of a latch lifting. You step back just in time for the door to open, and the woman slips out. Her face carefully arranged, her eyes not meeting yours as she disappears down the hall. You move on and pass a chamber where the light burns brighter. Inside, a group of men sits around a table scattered with cards, coins, and empty cups. Their laughter is loud, but under it runs a sharper edge. One throws down his cards and says, "Careful, or I'll have your wife invited to the next hunt." The others laugh, but the man addressed doesn't. In a court like this, the line between jest and threat is thin enough to vanish altogether. You keep walking, unwilling to stay long enough to see which it becomes. The next turn brings you to a storage room that smells of wine and smoke. Barrels line the walls, and in the far corner, two servants lean together, their foreheads almost touching. You hear the whisper of names you recognize, names tied to powerful families. They're swapping stories, each detail more dangerous than the last. When one glances up and sees you, the conversation stops instantly. You nod as if you heard nothing and step away, though you know the details will cling to your memory like burrs. A narrow stair leads upward into a smaller wing where the air is cooler and the floors creak underfoot. You stop outside a room where the door stands open just enough to reveal a young couple at a writing desk. The man guides the woman's hand over the parchment, his arm around her shoulder, as they compose a letter together. The intimacy in their closeness is unmistakable, but so is the care with which they choose each word. The letter once sent will bear both their names in its meaning, if not its ink. In this world, a single letter can bind people together in ways no ceremony ever could, or condemn them both. You slip away before they notice you, descending another stair into a long gallery that smells faintly of damp stone. Portraits here are older, the faces sterner, the eyes sharper. Many of them belonged to men and women whose reputations were forged or shattered by the same dangerous blend of desire and politics you've been witnessing all night. The silence in the gallery feels like a warning. Their stories have ended, but the machinery that shaped them is still grinding on, ready to swallow new names. At the end of the gallery, you find a door leading to the palace gardens. The night air is sharp, the scent of wet earth and cold stone, grounding you after the closeness of the halls. You wander down a gravel path until you reach a small pavilion. Inside, two figures stand close, their outlines blurred by the flicker of a single lantern. One says, "You know what they'll say if they find out," and the other answers, "Let them. We'll give them something worth saying." The words hang in the air, reckless and unafraid. It's the kind of defiance you've seen so rarely tonight, and you wonder how long it can last before the court's machinery crushes it into something else. As you turn back toward the palace, the windows glow like watchful eyes. You realize there is no corner of this place untouched by the constant negotiation of affection, loyalty, and survival. Every chamber, every path, every whispered word is part of the same web, and you've only begun to understand how deep it runs. You re-enter the palace through a side door, the latch closing with a quiet click that seems to vanish into the stone. Inside, the corridor is dim, lined with unshuttered windows that allow the moonlight to fall in pale stripes across the floor. You move slowly now, not from hesitation, but because you've learned that in this hour speed draws attention. Ahead, muffled voices seep from a partially open door. You step closer, careful not to let your shadow fall across the threshold. Two men stand near a tall chest, one holding a folded parchment. "It's enough to ruin her," he says flatly. The other answers, "Then we wait. It's better if it looks like she destroyed herself." You feel the air in the corridor tighten. They're not talking about exposing an affair immediately. They're talking about planting a seed, whispering just enough to let suspicion grow until the court takes over and finishes the job. You back away before they can sense you listening, but their words leave a residue in your mind. The passage curves toward the king's outer chambers, where the air is warmer and the scent of spiced wine drifts from a nearby table. A guard leans against the wall, his eyes half-lidded, but you know his inattention is more calculated than careless. Beyond him, a wide door stands open to reveal a room bustling with quiet activity, servants setting down trays of food, a scribe taking notes from a man in fine robes, and off to one side a woman seated with her hands folded in her lap, watching everything. Her gown is richly cut, but her posture is motionless, her expression unreadable. You realize she is there not as guest, nor entirely as decoration, but as a presence, someone whose closeness to the king is both shield and sword. You slip away before her eyes find yours and take a narrower passage that leads into one of the palace's lesser galleries. Here the portraits are of mistresses, wives, and women rumored to have been both. Some faces are smiling, some solemn, but the artist has given all of them the same strange, distant gaze, as though they already knew how fragile their place would be. You wonder how many of these women were remembered for their influence and how many for the scandal that erased it. A turn in the corridor leads you to a small sitting room where a fire burns low. Two women are seated close together on a couch, their knees nearly touching. One speaks in a whisper, her eyes darting to the door. You catch only fragments, the child too soon, no one must know. The other woman reaches out, taking her hand in both of hers, murmuring something too soft to hear. You leave before the moment can close around you, but the weight of it follows you into the hall. In this court, the truth about a child's parentage can make or unmake entire dynasties. Farther along, a faint rhythm catches your ear, the slow, deliberate pattern of a coded knock on wood. You trace it to a door recessed in shadow. When it opens, a man slips out quickly, his hood drawn low. He moves past you without a glance, and when you peer inside, the room is empty, save for a small table with 2 wine cups, one still warm. Someone has just left by another way. You let the door close, aware that whatever just passed in that room was meant to remain unseen. You descend a narrow stair to the ground floor, where the stone is colder underfoot. Here the palace hum falls away into a more secretive silence. You pass a storage room and notice a glint between 2 barrels, a thin gold chain lying forgotten on the floor. You pick it up for just a second, feeling the faint warmth of recent wear before you set it back down. In this place, even something as small as a chain can be used as evidence in a story you have no part in. Through another archway, you enter the cloister walk again, its arches framing the dark garden. The sound of voices drifts from the far end, and you follow it to find 2 men leaning against the wall, their heads close together. They're speaking about a planned interruption at tomorrow's hunt. Nothing dangerous, they insist. Only the kind of spectacle that draws the king's eye to one person and away from another. But you can hear the edge beneath their words, In a court like this, even diversions are sharpened into weapons. When they part, you linger in the cool air for a moment, watching your breath rise into the night. The stillness here is a relief, but you know it won't last. The palace is like a living thing, its heartbeat quickening or slowing, depending on who's watching, who's whispering, and who's willing to risk everything in a single reckless move. And the night still has more to show you. You leave the cloister's cold arches and re-enter the palace through a side door that groans on its hinges. Inside, the air feels warmer, thicker, as if every stone has absorbed the day's heat and the night's secrets. The torchlight here is dimmer, more intermittent, and you realize you've wandered into a part of the palace where the shadows seem to have more presence than the people. A faint flicker of light ahead draws you toward a half-open door. Inside, a small chamber glows from a single candle set on the floor. A woman kneels beside it, head bowed, her hands clasped not in prayer, but in careful concentration. Before her, laid out on the stone, is a pattern of objects: coins, pins, a scrap of cloth, and what looks like a twist of hair tied with thread. You realize you're watching a kind of ritual, the kind whispered about in both fear and fascination. Whether it's meant to summon love, secure loyalty, or curse a rival, you can't tell, but you know enough to understand that in Tudor England, such acts can lead to the scaffold as quickly as they might lead to a lover's bed. She doesn't see you, and you step away before the candlelight catches your face. You take a turn down a narrower corridor, where the walls are hung with dark velvet to muffle sound. Here you hear it clearly, the cadence of a man's voice, low and measured, and a woman's laughter in reply. You stop just short of a curtained alcove and glance in. They're standing close, their hands almost touching, but not quite. Every movement between them is deliberate, the slow tilt of her head, the way he shifts his weight toward her without closing the space entirely. It's a rehearsal, a game of proximity that can be denied if anyone enters. In this court, plausible deniability is as vital as breath. You move on, finding yourself at the edge of the kitchens, now quiet after the feast. A single lamp burns over a table where a young kitchen maid sits alone holding a folded piece of paper. She opens it slowly, her eyes scanning the lines, before she presses it to her chest and closes her eyes. The look on her face is a dangerous blend of hope and fear. You think about how such a letter, if found, could change her life in hours. In the wrong hands, it could be read aloud to her shame in the great hall, or it could vanish into a pocket and be used as a chain to pull her wherever the writer wants her to go. Past the kitchen, you follow a service passage into a small, dim-lit antechamber. A man in plain livery stands waiting, his posture tense. When the door opposite opens, a woman emerges, her gown slightly disheveled, her eyes bright. She doesn't look at him, but he steps forward, speaking under his breath. It's done. Now you'll keep your promise. She gives no answer, just keeps walking until the shadows swallow her. He remains in the doorway a moment longer, his jaw tight before turning the other way. You head back toward the main corridors where the palace's heartbeat feels stronger again. Through an open arch, you glimpse a small group seated around a table, a chessboard between them. The game is nearly over. White has only a king and a pawn left. But the conversation around the board is what matters. They're speaking in metaphor, each move accompanied by a remark about someone at court. He's cornered himself, one says, as a rook takes a bishop. She has only one safe move left. says another, pushing a pawn forward. The game ends, but the meaning behind it lingers in the air. A turn brings you to a wide staircase leading to the upper floor. As you climb, you hear the soft echo of voices from the landing above. Two courtiers stand at the top, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. One says, "If the king believes it, it doesn't matter if it's true." The other answers, "Then we'll make sure he believes it." You pass without slowing, but their words cling to you, proof again that truth here is often irrelevant, and belief is everything. In the upper corridor, a window stands open to the night. You lean out, breathing the cold air, and hear movement in the garden below. Two shadows cross the moonlit lawn, one following the other at a careful distance. You can't see their faces, but the tension in the space between them is unmistakable pursuit, or perhaps a dangerous rendezvous that began as pursuit. You step back inside, closing the window against the chill. The night is drawing on, yet the palace still feels alive with the quiet, ceaseless turning of its hidden wheels. You've begun to understand that these practices, the watching, the whispering, the trading of intimacy for advantage, are not isolated acts. They're part of a system so deeply woven into court life that it's impossible to tell where personal desire ends and political necessity begins. And tonight, you're still caught in its current. You turn from the window and continue along the upper corridor, where the torchlight flickers in long, uneven shadows. The night feels heavier now, as though the walls themselves have absorbed the weight of everything you've overheard. You pass a set of double doors, their carvings intricate with vines and flowers, and hear the low murmur of music from within. Curiosity draws you closer. Inside the chamber is bathed in candlelight, the walls lined with hangings of crimson and gold. A small group is gathered, seated in a loose circle. At the center, a man plays a lute, his voice smooth as he sings verses about unrequited love and dangerous beauty. The others listen, wine cups in hand, but their eyes are not fixed on the performer. They're watching each other. Every smile, every nod, every tilt of a head feels like a signal wrapped in politeness. You realize this is no mere entertainment. It's a space for calculated connection. Words spoken here, cloaked in poetry, can pass as innocent, while carrying messages sharp enough to wound. A woman across the circle catches your gaze briefly, her expression unreadable. When the song ends, she leans toward the man beside her and whispers something that makes him laugh softly. He stands, offering her his hand, and together they slip away through a side door. No one comments. In this court, departures are rarely questioned aloud. They are only noted and remembered. You leave the music room and find yourself in a narrower passage leading toward the older part of the palace. Here, the ceilings are lower, the stones uneven, and the air cooler. You hear voices ahead and pause, pressing against the wall to listen. Two men are speaking quietly about a meeting arranged for the following night, though one warns the other to keep it brief and make sure she's not seen. The tone carries more urgency than desire. It sounds like strategy wearing the mask of romance. Turning away, you descend a short flight of steps into a small reception chamber. A fire burns here too, though lower, and the room smells faintly of spiced wine. In the far corner, a servant is kneeling beside a coffer, arranging its contents. You notice the glint of small trinkets, rings, ribbons, miniature portraits, each wrapped in cloth and tied with cord. The servant works quickly, glancing toward the door, as though worried about being caught. You recognize the nature of what's being stored, mementos of liaisons, perhaps kept for sentiment, perhaps for leverage. In this palace, a token can serve as either a keepsake or a noose, depending on who holds it. The servant closes the coffer and disappears through a hidden panel in the wall, leaving you alone with the cooling fire. You linger only a moment before retracing your steps to the main hall. Here the hour is later still, the corridors emptier. You hear only the muffled thud of distant boots and the faint rattle of a latch somewhere out of sight. You take a turn into a wing you haven't yet explored tonight. It's quieter here, but not entirely still. From behind one closed door comes the rhythmic creak of a chair and the low murmur of a man's voice reading aloud, perhaps a poem, perhaps a letter. Now and then a soft laugh answers him. You can picture it without seeing two people close together, trading words as if they were touches. In this place, such an exchange is not merely private, it is combustible. Farther along, you pass an open door and see a woman standing before a mirror, adjusting the fall of her gown. Her eyes meet yours in the glass, and for a moment, you both hold the gaze. Then she turns away, fastening a clasp at her shoulder with steady hands. You sense she's preparing for an encounter. Whether to welcome or to endure, you can't tell. Either way, her reflection is the last thing you see before she disappears into the shadows of the corridor. You return toward the heart of the palace, and the air feels different, more watchful. Somewhere a door closes softly, followed by the echo of retreating steps. You pause listening, but the sound fades into silence. The night is nearly spent, yet the pulse of intrigue still runs through these walls. You can feel it in every flicker of candlelight, every shift in the shadows. In Tudor England, desire and fear walk the same corridors, and you have followed them far enough to know they never truly rest. You move deeper into the older wing, where the air is cooler, and the torches burn lower, their light breaking into restless shadows. The stones beneath your feet are worn uneven from centuries of passage, and the silence here is of a different kind, thicker, almost expectant, as if the walls themselves know the hour is nearing its most dangerous point. At the end of the corridor, you find a small door ajar. Inside the chamber is lit by only 2 candles, their flames bending toward each other in the draught. A man and a woman stand facing one another, their words low but sharp. You can't hear every phrase, but you catch enough references to letters sent and not answered, to promises made before others entered the picture, to consequences if certain names are spoken aloud. Their nearness isn't affectionate. It's charged with the brittle tension of people bound together by something they cannot undo. You leave before they notice, taking a side stair that curves downward into a vaulted passage. Here the air smells faintly of wax and damp cloth. You hear movement ahead and step into the shadow of an alcove just as a figure passes, a young page clutching a folded cloak and moving quickly toward the stables. You know that late-night journeys often mean more than they seem: a ride to deliver a message, to meet someone in secrecy, to vanish before the dawn brings questions. Further along, you reach a set of double doors leading to the Privy Council chamber. It should be empty at this hour, yet through the crack, you see 3 men huddled over the long table speaking in low tones. A name is repeated, followed by a discussion of alliances, debts, and the king's mood. It's not hard to tell they're mapping out someone's downfall. Whether the reason is political, personal, or both is irrelevant. In this court, the two are rarely separate. You slip away, crossing back into the main halls, which are now nearly deserted. A lone guard stands watch, his gaze fixed ahead, though you sense he registers every movement in the corridor. You pass without a word, heading toward the upper galleries, where the moonlight spills pale and cold through high windows. Near the end of one gallery, you find a door ajar to a room you haven't seen before. Inside, a single chair faces the fire. In it sits a woman, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the flames. She doesn't turn as you step inside, and for a moment, you think she hasn't noticed you. Then, without looking away from the hearth, she says, "You've walked far tonight. You've seen more than is safe to remember." Her voice is calm, but each word falls with the precision of a blade. You ask her what she means, but she only smiles faintly and rises. Every touch, every look, every whisper here, she says, has two stories, the one they tell and the one they hide. She walks past you and out into the hall, her footsteps fading into the silence. You stand there a moment longer, the fire's heat against your face, the cold of the stone seeping through your shoes. You realize that in all the rooms, corridors, gardens, and chambers you've passed tonight, there has been a single thread binding them together: control. The Tudors' most terrifying sexual practices aren't only about punishment ceremony or scandal. They are about making the private public, bending human connection into a lever for power and ensuring that no affection exists without consequence. You leave the room and make your way toward the outer halls. The palace is quieter now, but you can feel it breathing still, each stone holding the echoes of the night's exchanges. Somewhere behind you, another door closes softly. Somewhere ahead, the first gray hint of dawn will find its way through the high windows. You have walked the labyrinth, seen its traps and its performances, and you know that in Tudor England, morning does not erase the dangers of the night. It only gives them new shapes. Now the corridors are empty, the fires banked low, and the palace lies in its shallowest sleep. The air is cooler, the scents of wine and spiced meat faded into the faint tang of ashes. You walk slowly, your footsteps soft against the worn stone, and the weight of the night begins to settle into your bones. The voices you overheard, the glances you caught, the secrets traded in shadows, all of them feel both close and far now, like echoes drifting through fog. In the stillness, it's easier to see the patterns, how desire here is never only desire, how trust is rationed carefully, how intimacy is threaded with fear until they are impossible to separate. You step into a gallery where the moonlight spills silver across the floor. The air is quiet enough that you can hear the faint pop of cooling timber in the walls. Somewhere beyond these stones, the city is also resting, its own intrigues paused for a few short hours. But here within the palace, the machinery you've glimpsed never truly stops turning. As you move toward the outer door, you imagine the people you've passed tonight, waking to a new day. Some will find themselves elevated by what was whispered in their favor. Others will feel the walls close in because of a glance held too long or a word spoken to the wrong ear. The game will continue because here it always does. You step outside into the chill air, the first pale brush of dawn just touching the horizon. The river moves slowly, the water black and glassy, carrying away the remnants of the night. And as you breathe in the cold, you let the weight of the palace slip from your shoulders, knowing it will wait for you unchanged if you ever return.